This company is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It produces the world's only tool without which no modern chip can be made. Its monopoly was considered absolute, so much so that entire nations built their foreign policy around a single fact: no one can get around this machine. And then a group of physicists published a paper in one of the world's most authoritative scientific journals, and quietly showed that a second path exists, a path that no one was guarding. At the very heart of this story is not a company, not sanctions, and not geopolitics. At the very heart of it is light. One specific type of light with a wavelength of 13.5 nanometers. Light so rare that it literally doesn't exist in nature in a usable form. It has to be created from scratch. And it's precisely how it's created that determines who controls the production of the most advanced chips on the planet. To understand why a single paper in a scientific journal can shake the largest technology monopoly in history, we need to start at the beginning, with why light is even a problem in the first place. Every modern chip is made on the same principle. Light is projected through a stencil onto a silicon wafer, etching the tiniest patterns into it. The logic is simple. The shorter the wavelength of light, the thinner the lines, the more complex and powerful the resulting chip. The most advanced processors require a wavelength of 13.5 nanometers. This is extreme ultraviolet, or EUV. The problem is that this kind of light practically doesn't exist in an accessible form. It can't be bought. It can't be extracted from an ordinary source. It has to be generated every single second over and over with flawless precision. And for decades, scientists simply called it impossible. One Dutch company proved them wrong. The solution it found looks almost insane. The machine fires tiny droplets of molten tin, each about 25 microns in size, smaller than a grain of sand. These droplets fall in a vacuum chamber at a speed of about 70 meters per second. As each droplet falls, a laser strikes it, twice. The first strike flattens the droplet into a thin disk. The second turns it into plasma, heated to roughly 200,000 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than the surface of the sun. In a fraction of a second, the dying tin emits a flash of light with a wavelength of exactly 13.5 nanometers. And this happens 50,000 times per second. The laser itself, which delivers these strikes, starts out as a beam with a power of just a few watts. It's then amplified more than 10,000 times through 5 successive stages, up to tens of kilowatts. All of this just to hit a tiny droplet of metal at exactly the right fraction of a second, over and over, for months without a single failure. Developing this system took about 30 years and required tens of billions of dollars in investment. This isn't just technology. It's accumulated knowledge that can't be copied through patents because the key part of it isn't recorded in any document. It lives in the minds of engineers, in years of failures, in thousands of corrected mistakes. The lasers for the system are supplied by a German company. The mirrors are also from Germany, and they're among the most precisely polished surfaces ever made by humans. The plasma technology traces back to a California company that the Dutch manufacturer acquired. But what this company truly owns is the ability to make all these impossible parts work together thousands of times per second for thousands of hours straight without breaking down. The result is an absolute monopoly. The only manufacturer of EUV machines on Earth. A standard model costs more than $200 million. The newest versions run around $380 million a piece. Buying a chip printed without these machines is, at this point, practically impossible, because all advanced semiconductor production runs through them. The company's market capitalization has exceeded $670 billion, a European record. One analyst put it bluntly: the market is entirely under the control of a single player. Geopolitical strategy was built on this too. Export restrictions, sanctions, bans on equipment shipments, all of it rested on one assumption. EUV light is so difficult to create that no one could either replicate the machine or work around it. Block the machine, block the chips. That's exactly what the whole calculation rested on. But in February 2021, a paper came out in the journal Nature, and it called that very assumption into question. A group of physicists took a theory that had been sitting on a shelf for more than a decade and proved that it worked in practice. The idea is called steady-state microbunching, or SSMB. It describes a fundamentally different way to get the same light, without tin, without explosions, without plasma. The concept was proposed by an American physicist, one of the most respected specialists in accelerator physics, and his student around 2010. They published the theory, and it was practically forgotten because there was no suitable facility to test it. Everything changed when a young physicist working on his doctoral dissertation picked up the idea and significantly advanced the math. He established a connection between his research group and physicists in Germany. Together with the German National Metrology Institute and a Berlin research center, they gained access to a special facility, a specialized storage ring designed specifically for the conditions SSMB requires. This was the world's first ring of its kind. The experiment didn't take place in China. It took place in Berlin. And it proved the mechanism works. To understand why this matters, you need to understand the idea itself. Forget the tin droplets. Picture a ring, a racetrack for electrons called a storage ring. This is a type of particle accelerator, the kind usually found in major physics laboratories. Electrons are accelerated to speeds close to the speed of light and sent around the loop over and over. Under normal conditions, electrons in such a beam are loosely distributed in long, sparse bunches. They emit light that's useful for science, but completely unsuitable for printing chips. The key trick of SSMB is this. Using a carefully tuned laser inside a special device, an undulator, the electrons are given a slight nudge so that after one complete loop around the ring, they spontaneously gather into tiny, evenly spaced micro-bunches, each about 1 micrometer in size. When the electrons are packed this tightly and this evenly, something remarkable happens. They stop glowing like an ordinary light bulb and start emitting coherently like a laser. All their light waves fall into step with each other. And since the electrons keep circling the ring, they keep doing this without stopping in a steady state. Hence the name, steady-state microbunching. Compare this to the Dutch manufacturer's approach, and the contrast becomes obvious. The existing EUV source is, in essence, a strobe light. 50,000 individual explosions per second, tin debris, constant cleaning, mirror wear, downtime for expensive equipment. The SSMB approach doesn't explode anything. No tin, no droplets, no contamination. Just electrons in a ring, generating a steady, continuous, laser-like stream of EUV light. On paper, the promised specs are impressive. Researchers describe SSMB as a path to EUV power in the kilowatt range. Existing sources operate in the range of a few hundred watts, and the Dutch manufacturer is putting in significant effort to approach the 1,000-watt mark. SSMB is aiming at the same target from a completely different starting point. Why does power matter so much? EUV light is absorbed by practically everything: glass, air, any surface. The entire light path inside the machine is built on mirrors. But even the best mirror ever made loses about 30% of the light at each reflection. According to the researchers, the light reflects about 11 times before it reaches the silicon wafer. After 11 reflections, with a 30% loss at each one, only a small fraction of the original beam remains. For enough light to reach the wafer, the source has to be exceptionally powerful. The strobe light approach constantly runs up against this limit. A continuous laser-like source is one way to overcome it. There's another aspect that changes the entire economics of production. A single storage ring could power not just one machine, but an entire row of printing stations arranged around it, like workstations around a central light source. Chinese media have dubbed this concept the lithography cannon. This flips the entire pricing logic on its head. Right now, every machine carries the cost of its own complex light source built into its price. If the source becomes shared, the most expensive part gets split across multiple setups. A monopoly built on scarcity starts to crumble from within. This is exactly why the published paper mattered so much. The entire export control system was built on one assumption: the tin plasma path is the only path to EUV light. The restrictions guarded one road. They weren't designed for the possibility that physics would offer up a second one, a completely different one. You can't block a country from pursuing a different branch of science, especially when the key idea was openly published in scientific journals more than a decade ago. Now, some cold water, because it matters. The Berlin experiment proved the mechanism. It didn't build a chip factory. The distance between those two things is enormous. The electron bunches in that experiment carried only a tiny fraction of the charge needed for a real source. The path from a lab demonstration to a machine printing millions of chips with a minimal defect rate is an entirely different challenge. Remember, the Dutch manufacturer's own journey from impossible to it works took about 30 years. The light source is just one of hundreds of thousands of parts in the finished machine. Researchers from a European semiconductor technology center point to the main obstacle, the so-called yield gap. This is the brutal distance between beautiful light in a lab and millions of chips with almost no defects. You can have the most powerful, cleanest EUV beam in the world and still fail if the mirrors are slightly off or the chemistry isn't precise enough. This kind of experience can't be sped up with money. It builds up over years of failures. A storage ring isn't a tabletop device. Plans for one of the Chinese facilities call for a ring with a diameter of 100 to 150 meters. This is an infrastructure project on a national scale, and there are still open questions in the physics. Going from the Berlin demonstration to a stable kilowatt-class source running around the clock under real production conditions is years of intensive work. And no one can guarantee that a wall won't turn up somewhere along the way that no one currently suspects exists. But that's no reason for complacency, because China isn't the only one paying attention. In the US, a startup is working on a similar idea, using a large particle accelerator and a free electron laser to generate EUV light and feed it into existing scanners. Serious money and serious physicists on both sides of the Pacific have independently arrived at the same conclusion. The tin strobe light, for all its refinement, may not be the final answer. And here's the key thing to understand first. SSMB doesn't need to print a single chip to already undermine confidence in the monopoly's invincibility. As soon as a real alternative appears on the horizon, even one that's years away from practical use, the very belief in the absoluteness of control starts to crack. And a monopoly on a road only lasts as long as that road remains the only one. History is full of examples of companies that did their job brilliantly right up until the moment someone else started doing something fundamentally different.
If you're interested in stories like this about technology, science, and how the world changes at the level of physics and economics at the same time, like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps make more content like this. And while you're here, there's a related video on screen about how one company under sanctions managed to print a chip on an advanced process node without an EUV machine at all. Worth watching. And here's a question for you. If you were running the Dutch manufacturer, would you develop your own accelerator-based source? Or would you double down on tin droplets and keep moving forward with what already works? Let us know in the comments.